Well, welcome, Jonathan, to the Flower Podcast. I am so excited to have you as our guest this week.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Well, okay, so I'm going to give you a little backstory. I don't know that I've shared with you yet, but over the summer, we did an interview with Jenny Love. Do you know Jenny?
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually, I know through the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers.
yeah. Well, and she mentioned that she practices no-till farming, and we did chat about that, and we kind of barely unpacked it. And so when I was going through people I knew and people, friends of friends, and things like that, I noticed that you actually have a course that you've produced on no-till farming, and so I was like, okay, these are the perfect guests to kind of talk about this. And then the more I learned about you and the way you and your wife, Megan, right?
Yeah, Megan.
And the way you and your wife both have sort of structured your business and your whole approach to it made me even more fascinated and wanted to interview you. So I'm really excited about that. So before we get to all of that, I always like to ask, have you always been interested in flowers or farming? Or is this something that just sort of came out of nowhere? Where did this all begin?
Yeah, so we haven't always been interested in having a flower farm, and the way that we got here is important for how we um, got to where we are with our farm. And we have a fairly unique business model for our farm, so I know we'll talk about that. But uh, our main goal when Megan and I got married, we were looking for some land, and our goal was to have a homestead.
Okay.
So we wanted to have a garden where we grew our own food, and we were, as we were going down that path, we were also looking for a business to help pay for that. Because
Sure.
where everyone knows like gardening costs add up, um, and so we were just looking for a business to do that, and we just assumed we would grow vegetables. Um, so we live outside of Durham and Chapel Hill, Carborough in North Carolina, so central North Carolina. And there's a fantastic small farm scene here with a million excellent vegetable growers. Not a million, there are some very good vegetable growers here. Um, and there are more, the very established growers have employees that want to be farmers that come and work with them for a couple of years and then go and start their own farm, and they're very good farmers. So, the population of farmers is growing, and fortunately, the demand for food is growing, but the demand for food at a farmer's market is not um, so much. And I think that's a trend that's across the country. It's like the new farmers that are coming in really should look for alternative venues to farmers markets for their business. Um, anyway, we just realized we wanted to grow food for ourselves. We were going to be entering a very crowded marketplace if we were trying to sell it, especially at a farmer's market. And we thought back, Megan and I have both worked on large vegetable farms. And we thought back to those experiences and realized that, the farmers were growing amazing food and they had to sell it. you know uh, they would eat some of it, they would eat the seconds. A lot of times they might not have a great diet, like they were growing the food to sell, and we wanted to grow it for ourselves. We didn't want that to be our product. So Megan went through college. Megan knew Linda Chapman at Harvest Moon Flower Farm, and so she went and worked with Linda for um, a summer, part of a summer out in Indiana, and that opened our eyes to the possibility of flower farming, which is something we hadn't thought of before. So um, we had a friend that was getting married that fall. So Megan came back with some trays of flowers that she had started in the back of her hatchback. Um, and they all germinated and got leggy in the one day of travel from Indiana to North Carolina, just because the sun was beating on them in the back of the hatchback. We planted them in the ground. We did some flowers for a friend that fall, some very low-key flowers for their wedding. And that's how we got interested in flower farming. That's how we discovered flowers. Um, since then, our business has changed a lot. I don't know if this is when you want to talk about that, but
Well, I want to ask a question first.
yeah.
So, how long ago was that?
Oh, great question. So I should say the first flowers Megan and I did ever together was for our own wedding.
Okay.
And when we look back, this was just from a flower garden that we had with some friends. And when we look back at those pictures, I mean, we're like, what were we doing? We have some marigolds and some tuberoses, which we had, which were amazing, and some okra pods, and something now like we would be cringing at, but at the time, and even like looking back at our wedding, like the flowers are great. They're not professional, but they're great, and it's something that anyone could do for themselves if they're just willing to go out there. It's like if you start with beautiful flowers, you can end up with beautiful things. Just let the flowers, speak for themselves. So those were the first flowers we did.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And then, okay, so how did you, um, well, okay, so how long ago was that?
so that was in 2012 when we got married.
Okay.
Back of your question, that was in 2012. Um, so I think that was 2013 that Megan went to Indiana, and we just did the flowers for our friend's wedding. We ended up moving to this property and starting to grow here in 2014, so 6 years ago.
Okay, so you've been doing this a while, and then on this property, you do grow vegetables and things for yourself, right?
Yeah, we do. So we have our own vegetable garden. That's taken a few different forms. When we started out, we were growing, you know, way too many vegetables, like with the intention of donating them to a local food pantry.
Mm-hmm.
Had some neighbors that were the managers of the food pantry, so we would have 80 zucchini plants or whatever. That wasn't sustainable, and when they moved, we scaled back on that. So now we grow enough for ourselves and one other family that we're working together in the garden, and then enough to give away to family and friends. But it's on a much smaller, large garden scale. But we don't buy any vegetables. Year round, we don't buy any vegetables except a few things that we just can't grow, like celery, or if our onions run out in storage, carrots, a few things like that, like because we don't have a really good way to store them. But we don't buy any vegetables. We can talk about some of our other food operations, but we don't buy any meat. And so even on that small scale, like if your goal is to grow food for yourself, you can grow it for yourself. And we don't try to grow flour or grain or beans or
Right.
anything like that. But we're meeting our goal, the goal we started at of having a homestead garden. We're meeting that. The goal of having the flowers pay for it didn't work out the way that we thought it would. But we're really happy with where we are.
Well, I'm curious because I know that in some of the things I've read, you consider your operation to be a micro farm.
So so we have our farm is about a half acre,
Okay.
12-acre property. That half acre, that is not a half acre of cultivated space. That's the aisles, the paths, space around our cooler. So it's a small farm. Um, we're I think I should back up and I'll explain the size of the farm. But yeah, so it's a micro farm. To us, what we're thinking about as a micro farm, because there are you just Google micro farm, they'll say 3 acres, 5 acres. Well, that might be true on a vegetable farm.
Sure.
That is not true on flowers. 3 acres of flowers is a huge operation, just because of the planting density of the flower crops. So we're growing right now. We have 30 by 96 tunnel, 3 16 by 80 foot Caterpillar tunnels that we just installed, and one field of 12 beds. And that's what we grow flowers in. And then we have a separate field of 9 beds that we grow our vegetables in. Plus we have some perennials,
Okay.
peony and viburnum and some other perennials. So that is spread out over a half acre, and
Okay.
that's the farm. So from a more functional perspective, I think, for the micro farm, it would be, I think, maybe you would say a size where it would be a struggle to make your family income off of that farm. There are definitely people who could do it, people who are really good at doing really intensive production. They might be doing value added stuff, weddings, and things like that. But I think when you get to a half acre, even of a high dollar crop like flowers, you're looking at it, that's not going to be your family income. And I think that's part of the micro farm thing too. I think one of the things that we really want people to think about is like, you can be small and still be a farmer. And I think the more high quality professional flower farmers we have at any side of any size that are growing and using, selling local flowers, putting that out into the marketplace, the better off we are as an industry. So yeah, that's what we think about for our farm being a micro farm. I think once you get bigger than a half acre, especially a more intensely grown half acre than we have, you get to be into a bigger farm. You're going to need full-time labor and employees, and at some point you can't just be a little bigger. You have to be a lot bigger to meet the expenses of being a little bigger. But I don't see any limit on the small size. So one of the things I think is like the perfect example would be like someone who has a wedding design business, buys in most of the flowers, but has a small urban lot and wants to grow either a bed or two of dahlias or perennials, peonies, hydrangeas, viburnums, maybe mock orange or other things that either don't ship or are particular to that area.
Right.
I would encourage people in that situation to actually think of themselves as farmers, because when you're thinking about yourself as a farmer and not a gardener, you, I think, can think about your production in a different way. And I think we should be open to these micro farms. I mean, there are already micro vegetable farms in urban areas where people are growing in a few front yards, and bicycling in between them, and they're growing enough, and if you're doing that with flowers and you grow enough flowers to have a CSA for 6 weeks on your street for 6 families, I think we should be thinking about that as a farm, and that person can benefit from thinking about what they're doing as farming, rather than gardening, which just has a connotation of being more like a hobby. And that if you are growing any number of flowers as in a professional manner, caring about quality, high quality, and achieving high quality flowers, continuing your education as a professional flower grower, and then selling them into the world, those are farmers that we should be really excited about, no matter how small or how big they are. I think the more that we can grow and talk up and sell local flowers, just the more people are going to want them. And I think coronavirus has many of the people I've talked to, have more demand for their flowers than before. Now they've had to switch channels. Maybe they're not as profitable because they're not selling them to weddings. I think from a business perspective, that's very hard. But I think it just shows the demand that people have for stuff that is from their community, and hopefully the virus will soon be past us, the pandemic will be over, but the demand and interest in the local flowers will continue, and as an industry we'll be able to feed that and grow on that.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope that as well. And I feel like so much of what you just said. I love the idea though that you know we don't have to have acres and acres to be thought of as a farm. We recently moved, and I know the property that I was at that we owned that we grew maybe a half acre of flowers, and that doesn't include hydrangeas that we had planted here, there, everywhere, or um, trying to think all the helleborus, I mean, all these different crops that we mixed in to extend our season, or just part of the garden. And it was way more than a hobby, but it was, I mean, we did kind of trickle out of it, especially when we started podcasting, just because it was so much to keep up both, and we had to choose, knowing that someday we'd be moving like we just did. So I really like that though, because it encourages anybody with any size lot or access to land, no matter how small, to try something. I mean, it can be anything.
Absolutely. And, um, you know, I sort of have two responses to that. The first one is access to land is an issue.
Right.
Um, and so we should be encouraging people to think creatively about the land that they do have access to, um, and not just sort of say, well, if you want to be a farmer, you have to have access to acreage. Um, you know, nothing is going to be more local than the flowers grown inside the city,
That's
and
right.
sold in that city. And we're blessed to live in the beautiful country, but I think that we should definitely be encouraging not only growth in the country but growth in the city as well. And the only limit there, I think, is really creativity.
Hmm.
Uh, the other thing is, you know, you've probably encountered this, but we really want to talk openly about what we feel like is the myth of the masochistic farmer. Um, you don't have, like, the feeling like if you're not miserable, you're not a real farmer. Um, you don't have to work in the heat of you don't have to have a business that makes you work in the heat of the summer, that makes you never see your family, that makes it so you never get to go on vacation, um, that just makes you so miserable because you're always more and more behind, both on your to-do list and your finances. you know like that is farming, but like that doesn't really sound like a successful business to me. And I think our goal should be to have farm businesses that are fulfilling and happy. And if that means scaling down, then that means scaling down. And then you can be a better farmer and it will look different. But that's better than grinding your nose into the dirt and then you quit because you're not getting anything out of it. And that's not sustainable. I think sustainable agriculture has to also mean sustainable for the farmer, that you can be doing this for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, without either breaking your spirit or your body, or your bank account. And if you can't keep it up, that's not achieving any of the goals of the sustainable farming movement, just to have burned out farmers who quit and pass on their land to someone else.
Well, I love the expression. I can't remember if it was you or Megan that I heard say it, but this idea of, okay, there's sustainable farming, but then there's the sustainable farmer. And it was kind of just the whole, well, it's like what you just said, it's just, it's the lifestyle that goes behind it. It's, you know, I, I feel like it's so important because there is, I mean, I suffered from that when we were growing. You just felt like you were always behind. And as soon as you finally catch up, here comes some, rain for 10 days that throws you not only behind for those 10 days, but the next however long it takes to be able to get back in the field with something. And, it's so stressful to have that mindset. And so this might be a great time for you to just share maybe a little bit about that, but also your business model and how you and Megan have approached your business.
Absolutely, because we were in that situation, you know, and we saved ourselves from it. Um, and so it, it's not just that we're, you know, trying to talk about something as if we've never been there.
Right.
You know, um, but I do want to say I think it starts with understanding what your values are and what you want. Because you have to be able to look back at the end of the year and say, am I closer to where I want to be?
Mm.
You're not going to get there, maybe, and not, every year is not going to be perfect. But if things are on the right track, it'll be better every year. If things are not on the right track and you're further from where you want to be every year, then it's important to evaluate that. And so you need to know what your goals are. So for us, our main goal was to have the homestead garden, and the homestead for our family. And having worked on, you know, all of us worked on multiple farms, we did not want our sole source of income to be the farm. That seemed too stressful for us, you know. And so I'm blessed. I work as a you know, firefighter in you know, a nearby city. So that's a really nice. It's a steady job. I love it, and it also meets my other goals in life. You know, that the thing that they told you in school, sort of like, you know, find something you love and then find someone to pay you for it. It's like I feel like I achieved that, and so it's a great job, but it also meshes well with these other goals that we had that connect to the farm. So, for example, we have some financial security. You know, I have a pension, so it's like, you know, you can't just have a farm if you want the farm to be your livelihood. Like, you can't just make enough money to eat. Like, you need to make enough money for your retirement and health insurance, and we didn't want to have to do that. So our goal was never for the farm to support our family, and I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge and to know. And if you want to be farming, that should maybe be one of the first questions. Like, what are your financial goals for the farm? Do you want it to be, you know, supplemental income for your family, one person from your family's income, your whole family's income? So that was where we started with it. I was going to work off farm. Megan was also working off farm, because for the first 3 years of living on this property, we actually lived in a 77 square foot camper without any running water that fit inside our tobacco barn while we built our house. And it took us 3 years to build our house because we were sort of paying as we went, and doing most of the work ourselves. So that was the first 3 years. And each of those years we said our farm is not going to get any bigger this year than it was the year before. And each year it got bigger than it was the year before. So
How does that happen? I don't know how that happens.
Already it's getting away from us, right? So we wanted our farm to supplement our homestead business. Megan came back from Harvest Moon Flower Farm in Indiana, and Linda has an amazing business. And so, and I think she grows about 3 acres of flowers, and she sells it to farmers markets. She does weddings. She maybe does a CSA. I mean, she does many things. And we said, okay, well, we're going to do that. Meanwhile, we're growing on 1/8 of an acre. We apply to all the local farmers markets. We don't get into the ones that we want to get into. We don't get into any of them, but we didn't apply to the smallest ones because we just didn't feel like there was a point to going to them.
Right.
Not worth it to go for 4 hours and sell $120 worth of product. You know, and all the farmers markets were correct. On 1/8 of an acre, we were not going to be able to be season-long suppliers with adequate product for the large farmers markets. So at some point in the season, we realized we weren't going to get into any farmers markets. We already had a bunch of flowers that were in the ground, and the poppies were starting to bloom, and we didn't know what to do. So we put them in our truck and drove around to a few different florists, and just got an amazing reception. You know, poppies are a good one to go to florists with.
Yeah, that's a favorite.
So we that year started selling to two florists. One traditional florist that buys from a couple local wholesalers and also has relationships with a couple farms that have come to them, but they're not going out of their way to find local flowers. And then another florist who had just opened, who was buying exclusively local flowers. So she was really, she was a great customer to start with, and we started our businesses the same year, which was really nice because we were able to grow together. Mm. But we were also trying to do all the other things that Linda did, because we looked at her business and said, that's what we're going to do. So we were trying to do weddings. We never enjoyed weddings. It's just.
Let me interrupt for a second, because what I know you said, but I feel like, because I have been in this situation a little bit, not to the extent you are, but it's not, you feel like that's what you're supposed to do. It's not, I mean, you feel like there's this obligation, like, in order to be successful, these are all the boxes I have to figure out how to check. And that is, and so, yes, that may be what you were choosing to do, but it's also what you felt like you had to do. And I think that's a distinction I want people to hear, because you realized early on that, you know what, maybe I don't have to do all those things.
Yeah, I think we weren't successful because we were trying to do all of these things that we had seen another farm succeed at doing. And we said, okay, we're going to be successful doing those things too. Meanwhile, we didn't have the same farm. We were growing on our first year about 1/8 of an acre instead of 3 acres. We didn't have the same market. She was an established flower farmer who was one of the first flower farmers in her area, and had a loyal customer base. We were entering already a crowded marketplace. I mean, these are things that you should think about before. We say not as we do. Think about these things before you start your farm. We thought about them on the fly. But the real blessing from that was we started selling to retail florists.
That's great.
We also, those early years, we had to buy in some flowers from the local wholesaler for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they cut, someone requested roses. We don't grow roses. So, and the wholesaler actually also asked us if we would grow flowers for them, specifically zinnias, I think is a thing that maybe local wholesalers will be looking for. But we weren't on that scale. We never wanted to do that. That's a level of stress to have that sort of production schedule. So anyway, every year our farm got a little bit bigger. Every year we tried to do the same things more and more, and we were just miserable. We really didn't enjoy doing the weddings. We were doing a bouquet subscription. I can't remember how big it was at the biggest when we did it, maybe about 60 bouquets a week. I don't remember for sure. We didn't really enjoy that. We loved selling to florists. I mean, we've always loved that since the first year we did it. We never sold at a farmer's market. And so we gradually just tried to take things away. So we took away doing arrangements and only did DIY bulk flowers for weddings. Then we still didn't like it. Like, we just tried to remove the most stressful thing every year. And so then the next year we didn't do any weddings. And then the next year we didn't do the bouquet subscription. And what we were left with was selling to florists. But not only that, we just felt like we were working more than we wanted. I mean, more throughout the year than we wanted. And around that time, Lisa Ziegler published her book, Cool Flowers. And we already were familiar with the concept because we would plant Matricaria in the fall and Bupleurum in the fall. And so, it wasn't something we had never heard of before, but we just didn't know there were so many of them, right? And Megan at that point had the really transformative idea of, like, maybe we could only sell spring flowers. Actually, initially we tried to only sell flowers in the spring and fall and take the summer off. But what we realized was we couldn't take the summer off. We had to be here planting flowers and things like that. So what we decided is we would just sell in the spring, and we were already just selling to retail florists. So right now, our business is we only sell to retail florists. The exception was coronavirus. During the shutdown, we didn't know what was going on. And so for a few weeks, we did home bouquet deliveries. We were fortunate to have all these contacts from when we did the bouquet subscription,
Oh,
and an
wow.
established mailing list, and many of those customers or other people, sort of connected to the farm, signed up and really supported us and got us through that period of uncertainty. But then we went back to selling to our florists, and they ordered more than ever. Um, so uh, we're only selling to retail florists, and we're only selling in the spring, which is from whenever the flowers start coming in the high tunnel. It's usually between the middle of February and the beginning of March for the anemones. And then we sell until the last week of June. And that's when we're out. A couple of the things that happened as we were growing our farm, and this is sort of where the scale issue comes in, is what we realized is flowers weren't a good business to just supplement and pay for our homestead gardening. It's like, in order to be we wanted to sell to the florists, in order to be a good supplier for the florists, we had to be a certain size so that we were giving them flowers every week for enough weeks of the year. And then all of a sudden it was, a big business, or, a bigger business. And so it really wasn't a good fit for that, but we just loved doing that aspect of it, and proud of the flowers we were growing, found it very fulfilling. So we wanted to find a way to do that sustainably for us. And this is what it is. Now, every year, every time we eliminated something, our profit margin went up.
Really?
When we stopped doing arrangements for weddings, our profit margin went up, and it also maybe our total sales went up. When we stopped doing the bulk flowers for weddings, our sales went up. When we stopped doing the bouquet subscription, our profit margin went up. When we started only selling in the spring, we just had our total sales went way up. And so to us, that's a lesson about specialization. We probably weren't charging enough for wedding flowers because that wasn't really what we wanted to be doing. And so we weren't, good enough at it to charge enough for it. And we also didn't want to charge enough for it because, we felt a little conflicted because we didn't have that amount of money for our wedding. We had a budget wedding. And so if
Oh,
we
I
were doing
understand.
weddings, we couldn't have paid for our flowers ourselves. So that was a little bit of a conflict, but we dropped that because we didn't enjoy it. When we were doing buckets for weddings, those were flowers we could not sell to the florists, and we have a higher profit margin doing the wholesale, the florists, or we feel that way, for sort of the same issue. But at any rate, the florists buy from us every week. The wedding client buys from us once in their lifetime. Like, who's a better customer? Like, who do we want those flowers to go to? Is the florist. That's the business that we have. That was what we wanted to focus on. That was especially true with the bouquet subscription. We were thinking, okay, when we started it, well, there are going to be flowers that the stems are too short, or they're crooked, or this week that's one color we have too much of, but those were never enough flowers. And so we were always holding back flowers from the florists. And it was the same thing, like the more flowers that we could sell to the florists, okay, maybe on the flowers that were in the bouquet, that was a higher profit margin. But the more that we had available to the florists, the more they bought. And so the more we could offer them, the more they would buy, more and more and more. And so, our sales just went up every year. When we went from the summer to the spring, because we're such a small farm, and flowers, compared to greens or some vegetables, flowers have a long time to bloom. the fastest is a sunflower. It's still going to be around 56 days for a fast sunflower. So we couldn't have, when we were having summer flowers, we were holding beds out of spring production.
Okay.
So it didn't, we have every single bed in spring flowers right now. And if we were selling flowers later in the year, some of those beds would not be in flowers.
No, that makes sense.
And so by only selling flowers in the spring, we're growing roughly the same number of flowers as we would. So a little bit less because we could have fall flowers, but for the summer flowers, that reduced our number of spring flowers. So we have roughly the same number of flowers, but the spring flowers cost more. We're talking about larkspur and snapdragons and ranunculus and anemones, as opposed to zinnias and sunflowers and celosia, which we were just never able to get as high a price for.
Right. Well, I think too, the one thing that I always remember is we would always start having local farmers show up about the time our business was dropping off. And so, you're producing, you have all of your land in production for this season. That is one of the busiest seasons, because you've got, maybe you're lucky you get Valentine's Day, and you may have Secretary's Day, you may have Easter, you may have Mother's Day. Of course, you have tons of spring weddings, and you're right, all those blooms. The people are used to paying more for a ranunculus or an anemone, whereas zinnia, maybe not as much, and that's kind of that frustrating. It's easier to grow, maybe, but is it worth it if you're not getting the money for it? So then, those are all those questions. And
so
yeah.
So what happened when we were growing in the summer, and already now, so after Mother's Day, which is also the graduation for the local universities, are all on that weekend, then the demand just plummets. So we're talking about June now. Really, the first week of June, demand starts to go down. The third week of June, it's very low. It goes very low. The week after the 4th of July is dead.
Yeah.
And so we would have florists that would either close their shop for 2 weeks, or maybe the owner of the shop, who was the person who did the buying, would go on vacation for a month in the summer because that was a low demand time for them. And there's someone else in the shop who's buying, but we don't have a relationship with that person. And it's easier for them to just buy everything from the wholesaler. Maybe they don't want to pay more for the flowers because they're not the owner of the shop, And so when the florists were starting to close their shop in the summer, we were looking at that and thinking, well, we still have sunflowers, we still have celosia, we still have zinnias, but why are we out working in North Carolina in August when our customers are not, And so that was a real thing that fell into place for us, and it all fell into place at the same time. Lisa's book, Slow Flowers, came out, which gave us a model for the agricultural aspect of it. We looked at the florists and their slow season in the summer.
Cool flowers? Did you say cool flowers?
It's called Cool Flowers.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a fantastic book. It's essential reading for any flower farmer. And we built a high tunnel through a loan through our local chapter of Slow Money, and that allowed us to have flowers early enough. Without some protected space, we wouldn't be able to just grow only spring flowers in our climate and have a successful business, because we need to get the ranunculus and the anemones and the early snapdragons and all of that sort of thing. So right now, this year, 2020, from the middle of February until the last Monday in June, we delivered every week. And it ramps up, it ramps down, but we felt really good about that. And coronavirus was a monkey in the wrench, but it was still our best season ever. And one thing that we think happened, now that our florist customers, their business was down by at least half. They're only doing home deliveries and funerals, basically. But uh, I think they wanted to sort of support some local farms, but also we were able to be flexible and reliable. So on at the last minute, they could place an order, and they knew that we would deliver it if we said we had it. Whereas, the wholesale customers were saying, well, normally we get 3 trucks a week from Miami, but they're telling us it might be 1, it might be 2. We won't know until they don't come. And so the imported flowers, and I think even, the flowers from the not local flowers from within the United States, like from the West Coast, were just not reliable because of logistical issues. And so having a robust local flower farming community that could deliver flowers to the retail shops, which I think is um, an underutilized outlet for flower farms,
Definitely.
I think helped us through the coronavirus because we were able to be reliable suppliers for them.
Well, all this is amazing, and I can't imagine, what many areas of our country would have done without local flower growers, especially through the spring. People like you growing these cool flowers because, yeah, things were just too unreliable. And then, people don't want to take chances on bringing product in on speculation when they don't know what's going to happen. Meanwhile, you have flowers already in the ground that are coming up because you can't put the brakes on them, and they just keep coming. So, okay, so I know we could talk for hours because I'm fascinated by all of this. I want to dig in, no pun intended, to the no-till situation because I think of no-till as being one of those things. Well, I think of tilling and tractors and all of this, these pieces of equipment as really fundamental when you're trying to save time, become efficient. You think of all these things, but I know ever since I started learning about this that's actually there is a trade-off, and that's why I just want to hear more about it. And people who maybe are nervous about it or maybe haven't thought about it, because of their size of their growing operation. I don't know. I'd really love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I know that was the thing that got you to us, and then sorry I went all off on this on the
Oh
size of the
no.
farm. Haven't talked about no-till. So our
No,
course,
you're fine.
yeah, they all fit together. So our course with Lisa with the Gardener's Workshop is called the No-Till Microscale Flower Farm, and we really think that no-till can probably be scaled up, but we don't know about that because we're a small farm.
Right.
But we think that no-till is a great um, uh, technology, for micro farms specifically. And so one of the reasons is it's low overhead, low investment. So, a tractor is amazing. If we had a tractor, we would use it, not for tilling, but we would use the scoop all the time. Like, it's much more efficient to have a front loader. But $30,000 for the tractor. We do occasionally need a bush hog, and um, we're blessed. We live in a rural area. There are about 8 tractors on our street. They all have a bush hog on them, and we can most of the time find one to rent, borrow, or whatever it is when we need a bush hog. If you live in town, you hopefully don't need a bush hog. So that
Right.
won't be you. But with a pickup truck and some wheelbarrows, you can do anything. Um, so we got into the no-till because what we were doing wasn't working. I mean, it's a sort of a similar idea to the to the size of the farm. What we were doing wasn't working. We bought tobacco land. It has been in a tobacco or tobacco wheat rotation for at least 100 years. When we closed on the land, there was a clause in the contract that said that the current tobacco farmer could harvest his tobacco. So when we moved out here, 4 of the 12 acres were just disked red dirt that had had tobacco in them a month earlier. So, this land's been tilled for 100 years, so that would make it sort of typical eastern United States, highly eroded agricultural land. So, it's over-fertilized, over-tilled red clay. So the organic matter was very low, as is typical of those soils. And we had a tiller that, we didn't have any money when we started the farm. So we had a tiller that was on permanent loan from someone, a heavy duty rear tine tiller. And we would till, and then an hour later we would go to seed. And if we wanted to, we could walk on the bed and we wouldn't leave footprints. So, things didn't grow well in that situation. And it's not a surprise. So, and it wasn't getting better. So we were looking for solutions that were within our price range and improved our soil. And what we did is we encountered Tony and Denise Gates of Bear Mountain Farm in Oregon. And anyone who's interested in no-till, I just want to really encourage you to go look at their YouTube channel and their blog on their website. Bear Mountain Farm, they have a real passion for educating and also for experimenting, and they make all of this wonderful material. So they're a great resource. We turn to them all the time, to see what they're up to and to learn from them. And so we learned from them, and we saw what they were doing about the same time Jean-Martin Fortier's book, The Market Gardener, came out. And so we learned about occultation. And so we looked at that and we said, well, here's something that we can do. Our soil has been tilled for at least 100 years, and it has not led it to a good place. So let's try something else. And so what we did is we got some silage tarps, we grew some cover crops, and we basically followed sort of the practices that are outlined in The Market Gardener and that Tony and Denise talked about with their farm. So our basic structure is we start seeds in soil blocks, we transplant them into burned landscape fabric. When they come out, we may plant a cover crop. If we do or if we don't, we put a silage tarp on it, and we take that off. The soil is bare, and we're not tilling and burning up the organic matter. One thing that we did not do early on, and we are doing now, and a sort of calling it like a final till kind of program, and we would certainly encourage people to think about this as they're starting their no-till system rather than as they're into it, is we're importing a lot of organic matter and mixing it in.
Okay.
So we're bringing in dump trucks of compost from a local composting facility, we're disking it in, and we're remaking our beds. And when we're doing it, we're making our beds further apart. So when we initially made our beds, they were much too close together, and it's not working for bushy flowers. It would work for carrots and collards and things like that. And so we were just wasting time and breaking flower stems. So we had to separate the beds further apart just for efficiency. And we're taking the opportunity to mix in about 60 yards of compost per eighth of an acre. And that's really made a huge difference. We were having, on our small size of farm, a hard time working cover crops into the rotation. And I think that's a challenge on micro farms. And so importing the organic matter is a great strategy, especially if you have access to high quality and affordable compost. You could, and we encourage people to think about basically just building up, like you don't have to till that in, you could just build your beds up. It wasn't working with our soil. We tried that. But the clay just made an impenetrable horizon. The roots would grow down to that and then turn sideways. And I think with looser soil, with soil that was better to begin with, you might be able to do that. It didn't work for us, and we found we just really had to mix it in a little bit so that the change between the added improved amended soil and the bottom soil was more gradual. But when you're thinking about no-till, so for someone who's already farming using a conventional tillage system, you know, this is not something that it's not like organic certification where there's lots of paperwork and it takes 3 years to achieve and you have to do your entire property, or something like that. You know, you can experiment. You can put 1, 2, 3 beds into no-till, and there are different no-till techniques that you could learn about. And you could try 1 or 2, and if that works for you, you could try to scale it up. I would encourage people who are already farming who want to try this but are uncertain if it's right for them to just, if what you're doing is working, there are lots of really good farmers who till, who have excellent soil, who take care of their soil. And if you're in that situation, what you're doing is working, don't feel like you have to transition your whole farm at once. You can experiment and figure out what would work for you and then transition in a way that makes sense. If you're starting a farm, and you want to start out with no-till, especially talking about like the urban farmers on very small areas, well, that's a great fit for that because you don't have to invest equipment to be, expensive equipment to be growing in such a small area where really the financial return may not make any sense. Like no-till is such low overhead. That's one of the big benefits of it for people who are starting out and don't already have all of that equipment.
Well, and I think that, one of the things that I'm glad to hear you say that, because one of the things that I think I've heard before is that when you have a traditional farming situation and then you start to convert areas to no-till, is that sometimes it takes as much as maybe 3 years before that land is fully like incorporating all the benefits to it. And I don't know if that's true with flowers. I know this is what I've learned with other crops, like soybeans or corn or things like that. Just because I have farmers that in my family and they do practice no-till, which I was shocked at and thrilled. And so, anyway, that to be said, I often think because it just takes time for that soil to recover from the breakdown of all of those layers and the microbial bacteria, all the parts, all the things that make it healthy have to kind of grow back. And I was curious if you found that to be the case. I mean, I know when you're dealing with clay, I mean, it's basically like you're dealing with, a tile floor almost, that you've got to figure out how to slowly break that that is a real barrier. I know I've tried planting and stuff like that, and it is so hard. And people that don't have to deal with that are really fortunate. So.
Absolutely. I think that obviously the practices that are going to work for you and the things that are going to make sense for you are site specific.
Sure.
Both on your sort of geographical area, like, obviously North Carolina is different than the Midwest, and also on your specific area, like, land that's already in agriculture is different from, starting an urban farm on an abandoned lot. But I do think we wanted no-till to be the magic bullet. And it has worked for us, but it was not the magic bullet. Just in the sense that it didn't transform overnight. It was still, it was gradual improvements, and the important thing was that we could look back in each year and say that was better than the year before.
So how do you undo 100 years of poor agriculture? I mean, it takes time. I mean, that's not going to be, I mean, that's the one thing I will say is, it just takes time to overcome that. So.
Yes, it does. Some things are immediate, and these are things we're very proud of, and it's not. I don't want to say it's tangential to the farm because it's not, but it's not directly related to growing crops. which is just, the next year, or the year after that, the biodiversity of the farm was 100 times what it
Wow.
was the first year. And we're talking about different insects and birds and rodents, which we're not always thrilled by, but
Mm.
snakes and things like that. And so that was very immediate, just from establishing good habitat, going from a monoculture to a not monoculture.
Mm.
Um, that was obvious and very, very fast. The soil life, the soil microbiology, but also the soil macrobiology, the little beetles that eat the aphids and things like that. They did take longer to establish, and the tilth of the soil takes longer to
Mm.
establish.
Mm.
So um, I do think it is 3 years seems about right with my observation. Even with like adding these amazing organic matter, these beds that we've created, I've noticed the first year there's a huge increase in productivity, and soil is nice and loose and fluffy, and it's amazing. The second year, it's way better than it was before, but it's not as good as the first year. I think the soil has settled down a little bit. There may not be quite as much air in it.
Mm.
It's sort of getting acclimated. And then the third year and onward seem to be really good. Um, the roots have penetrated and then decomposed and created pathways for air. The soil micro and macrobiology have become established and gotten into their groove. And those things release the nutrients that are available in the organic matter that you added. And so, it does take some time to build that back up. Um, I forget you know, how much topsoil is made in 100 years of plant growth, but it's very little, and we're starting with none of that. So building it back up, like you said, takes some time. It's not overnight.
No, but I think long term, it's dynamic. I mean, the difference is dynamic, whether it's the ecosystem, and I mean, you used all the right terminology, but whether it's this just well, all the things you mentioned, and I feel like I know when Jenny and I had conversations over the summer, and it was just like she was talking about the wildlife, the bees, you have the good insects start to repopulate, and anyway, it's a dynamic thing.
It is, and
And
of course, like farming requires to manage that. I think people who aren't farmers or gardeners may not realize, like, yeah, you're not creating a natural system. It's a system that's changing all the time, and you have to manage so things don't get out of balance. You don't have too many, harlequin beetles or whatever it is that you have a problem with. But I think that no-till, besides being accessible, Megan and I like to sort of focus on different things about it. I really like that no-till is really accessible to people who are starting out. Like it was to us. Like we could not afford the alternative to no-till, which was getting equipment. Um, but the other thing that um, Megan especially likes to focus on, to hit the other aspect of it, is just the growth in the soil life, the sustainability of it. When you till, and people may not, just for listeners who haven't thought about what you're doing, when you're tilling, you're inverting the layers of the soil. So there are things in the soil that want to be where there's light and air, and there are things that want to be where it's dark and there's less air. And there are things that want to be next to other things, or like the hyphal net. The mushroom is not the fungus. The mushroom is just a tiny bit of the fungus, and
right.
underneath is the hyphae of the fungus that are massive, and you pulverize them with a tiller, and they will eventually reform themselves. But they would prefer not to have to do that. So not only, and then so you're disturbing all of those things, and at the same time you're introducing massive amounts of oxygen to the soil. So that just is like, it's like your morning coffee. everything in there just explodes and blooms. So one of the things that that does is it digests the organic matter in the soil more quickly. So when we're talking about killing, burning up organic matter, that's what we're talking about, is that when you till, you add oxygen, everything in the soil goes into overdrive, it digests the organic matter, and then it exhales carbon dioxide. So when that organic matter is in the soil, it's not in the air. Agriculture is one of the major contributors to greenhouse gases. No-till is not going to save the planet if we don't make any other changes in our life. But we like that we're doing little things that help take
Sure.
carbon out of the air and leave it in the soil. And in the meantime, we're building these underground networks and communities that we're not disturbing. And they're amazing relationships that the fungus have with the plants that, expand the reach of the roots by many, many times larger than the plant would just have on its own, and help it get minerals and water. So, the plants evolves with those relationships. Tilling can set them back. And, some people are very good at managing that to have really wonderful, healthy plants, or have wonderful soil that just, can take that. For us, with our soil, we've just found that things are happier when we don't till, and they're happier every year after that, happier than the year before, and that's what we want.
I love that. Well, I always like to, I mean, we've covered so much, and I know we're just there's all these soil analogies. We're just skimming the surface right now. But, and I appreciate the fact that you've created this course that you can get at the Gardener's Workshop. And this particular course is an evergreen course, so you can get it year round, I believe. It's open enrollment. And so, is that true? I want to make sure I'm saying that right.
Absolutely. So you can sign up for the course. It's called the No-Till Microscale Flower Farm. You can sign up for it at the Gardener's Workshop at any time. I can't remember exactly how long it is. That's my fuzzy newborn brain. We have a 2-month-old. So some details are just slipped from the mind, but I can't remember exactly how long it is. It's between 4 and 5 hours, I think. It covers a wide variety of topics, and you can download, you can purchase it at any time, and then once you have it, you can watch it at your own pace. You can go back and look at things as much as you want. And then we also have a Facebook group, a closed Facebook group for people who have seen the course, and we have conversations on that that are sort of ongoing between students, and we jump in. So yeah, you can get that at any time. So whenever it works for you is when you can get it.
Well, I know. Thank you for sharing it with me. I've enjoyed going through. I kind of went through the crash course of it, and I want to go back and explore more. But you cover a wide variety of topics, not just no-till, but a lot of other things and techniques, which I thought were really helpful. And so I wanted to make sure we shared that. But as we close, I always love to ask my guests. I always like to say, is there a piece of advice that someone's given you that meant a lot? Or, I mean, you've shared so much advice, it's always hard, and I always say that, but I want to give you the opportunity to maybe share something that's either on your heart or something that's meant a lot to you.
Yeah, there is something that was given to us, advice that was given to us as a wedding present, actually, that we now give to other people when they get married. That has helped us immensely in our personal life and in the farm. So we call it the annual retreat. And there's a specific text. Of course, I don't have it in front of me, but basically the idea is every year we go on a retreat, and we do separate ones for the farm and our not farm life. But so we go on a retreat, we talk about how things are going, we talk about our short, medium, and long-term goals. No topic is off the table. So, now we have kids, so we have a lot to talk about with kids, but just, enough time without the kids, to, projects we have that we want to do around the house, what big trip do we want to take in 5 years? What's next on our homestead? Do we have career goals or personal goals with hobbies? I mean, anything like that. And we do talk about that in our course because it has been so foundational in our relationship, but also for the farm, because that is where we then look back and say, okay, our goal was to have a business that supported our homestead, not a business that took over our life. So we don't have time to go on the vacations that we want because of the farm. So what do we need to change? This is okay, we're taking a break. We realize that the farm is not fulfilling the goals that we had for it, and it's like the runaway train, it's getting ahead of us.
Right.
And what are our goals? And one of the things that has been hard, and this may not apply to everybody, but one of the things that has been hard about that, for me, is every year is like, well, we're confronting the possibility that, the farm isn't working for us anymore. Like maybe we will decide at some point, okay, we need to stop doing this. But, so that can be a little exhausting, but it's better than not stopping to think about what you're doing and making the changes that you need so that it is a sustainable part of your life. And so every year we're looking back at the farm. How did things go? Are we meeting our goals, financial goals with our customers? What new crops do we want to try? But is this fitting into our life in the way that we want? And the gift of that idea of taking this retreat every year, like I said, we separate the business and our sort of personal life into two separate retreats. That has really, really been transformative for us in our personal life and for the farm. And we just can't spread that enough.
Well, I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because so many times, we don't take the time, we don't stop, we don't think about those things. And sometimes you can just tweak little things and make a huge difference in the year. And, and it's good to be able to have that time just to be honest and to share your feelings and be able to sort through them and prioritize things and get perspective and then make good decisions.
And to realize when your goals are not realistic, like once we had kids, and with my work schedule, we just realized, we're going to go to church once or twice a month and not every week. And it's not realistic to go every week, and we shouldn't try to do that because we're just going to end up being unhappy that we're not meeting our goals. But making realistic goals and then evaluating, like, are you meeting them? Are they realistic? What do you need to change? What can you do more of? And what's going really well? It's important to acknowledge the things that are going well too.
I love that too. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Maybe we'll have to do another episode here next year sometime, just to kind of, or maybe come and see the farm if we can ever, do in-person things again. That would be great too. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.